Speed kills, or at least that's what we've been told. But to what extent is that true? What are we talking about? Are we talking about 40 time? Are we talking about 100-meter, 3-cone drill, or the elusive game speed? How much of this gift does one really need to succeed? And does more speed always win? These are the types of questions we are going to try to answer each and every week here on the official Campus to Canton's brand new recruiting show. Well, we'll take a look at recruits through the lens of analytics and, as always, with an eye on fantasy football. Welcome into the official. Matt, a.k.a. Big Wide Receiver Guy on Twitter. He's one of our co-hosts. And welcome in tonight. Really good to have you here, buddy. Looking forward to get started.
Hello. Hey.
David, a.k.a. Solving Football, is our other co-host. Very excited to embark on this project with you guys. Recent additions to Campus to Canton as a group. And we've been chatting it up in the Slack and just said, you know what, let's just get on air and talk about this stuff. David, first of all, I want to ask you, I followed you on Twitter before you were a member of Campus to Canton, but I always liked your handle, Solving Football. What does that mean to you? Like, what were you trying to do with that before you joined us? And now how does your work reflect that now you're here?
Yeah, the name is, honestly, it kind of sounds pretentious, but it's like, who's this jabroni that's going to just solve football? But really, I like to watch football. I like to learn about football. I have a passion for player evaluations. I think the main thing I'm trying to do is sort of marry film and data and try to project a player's career path. So I started out doing NFL draft content, and now I've kind of gravitated towards high school recruiting more. Honestly, it's more challenging and more fun for me to try to project a player straight from high school and see how far they can go, whether it's G5, P5, or NFL.
Absolutely, and that fits perfectly with what we're trying to do here. So I love it. I love that your passion. And then Matt, you joined us as Big Wide Receiver Guy. Of course, you have a passion, I think, for wide receivers and scouting that position. One thing you were doing on Twitter, and we talked about it in our Slack before you were even a member, and we're like, this Big Wide Receiver Guy is doing some really cool stuff, specifically your mold scores. And just, if you want to briefly give us a touch on what you were doing in that area, because that was one of the reasons we felt like we needed to bring your brain in. And I want the listeners and the viewers to understand who they're dealing with here.
Yeah, so mold scores were an analytical approach to basically a film grade. I would break down a player's game into 4 categories: deep threat, yak, jump ball, and separator, to show how well they score in each area from an analytical perspective, but lined up well with draft capital.
Yeah, and that's great stuff. And I think you were doing that for college guys going to the NFL, right? Basically.
And I was doing it from devy too, but yeah.
For devy purposes. And so now we're all taking a step even further down the river here and looking at these guys as, sometimes juniors in high school or seniors in high school, like we just currently got done with a lot of stuff with the 2022 class. I think you guys are ahead of me on the 2023 class, already looking at them. But what we're going to do, like I mentioned in the intro, is we're looking at recruiting. Ultimately, this is a recruiting show, but I think we're going to be looking at it differently than what a lot of people do. And so we're going to be trying to, as David tries to do, solve recruiting, solve this puzzle of these grainy huddle tapes and watching these videos. And can we use analytics? And this is like almost something we are kind of not only inventing here, but like we're doing stuff that not a lot of people are. I know there's a couple of accounts on Twitter and a couple businesses that are doing it. But diving in, first things first, we are going to be looking at speed this week. I thought it was a great first topic. And one thing we've been doing is tracking miles per hour reached on the field of play. And I know you guys have some pretty cool homemade ways that you have calculated this by looking at distance traveled and doing the measurements to see what MPH ended up being for these guys on their tapes. And so let's get right to Matt. I know you've done a lot of stuff with top speed on field, which is different than a 40 time, different than a 100-meter time. And actually, one thing I'd like us to do in the future is compare top speed with 100-meter time, because most people are going to track records and seeing how fast these guys are on the track, but that doesn't always reflect the mysterious game speed. Well, he's faster on the field, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also started to build out a model to kind of rank these guys with scoring from high school, how they will produce in the pros, or sorry, not the pros yet, on the college side so far. What are the components in your model as it stands right now? And I know this might change. This is like first draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, this is only the beginnings of this project. But at the moment, we're using our manually timed mile per hour times, a production score, which currently consists of 4 production metrics or so, and 24/7's grades, non-composite, just their straight up raw grades.
Which is another thing that's nice is you're using not just star rating, but that actual 4-digit, grade, which is a little more granular, of course. So one thing that's been interesting to me, we follow shout out Recruiting Analytics, which is a great account on Twitter. We are not associated with them, but they do great stuff. And this idea of top miles per hour on the field. And I know that you have, I'm going to bring this up. This was your recent work here. I know you have looked at miles per hour and then associated with college football PPTG. Now, what is PPTG? What are we looking at here? Miles per hour as it correlates with what?
Mm-hmm. So fantasy points per team game is something that we're using instead of just fantasy points per game, because it eliminates those outliers that have only played like 2 games in 3 years, for example, but they're averaging 15 fantasy points per game, which is not something we want. We don't want those guys to be seen as a success. Doing this eliminates that.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then we've got here, I put this red line because we've talked about this. And while the correlation isn't awesome at R squared of 0.068, which a lot of people would scoff at, but when you actually look at this, it's pretty clear that there is a line of demarcation where you kind of need, and it's similar to other ways that we measure speed on 40 time and other things, where you kind of need a baseline good speed. And after that, it may not necessarily mean faster is always better, but you do need to hit something. And we kind of came up with this 19.5. Do you want to tell me who the one circle over here is that's breaking all of our rules?
Mm-hmm. That would be Isaiah Hodgins. So
yeah. Our least favorite player all of a sudden.
But yeah, no longer a favorite.
Yeah, he was very productive at Oregon State.
Oregon.
And he scored very well, but he was slow. Other than that, though, it looks like you kind of at least need 19.5 miles per hour top speed, roughly, to get into that, at least averaging 10 fantasy points per team game, or definitely up into the 15s. Now, the interesting thing is you don't have to be at 21 or 22. Obviously, we're in awe of these guys that hit 22, especially the bigger guys that hit really fast speeds, but you don't have to. It doesn't necessarily mean faster is always better, but you do need that minimum 19 and a half or so, give or take. And these are approximate, of course. These aren't, laser timed or anything like that. So the R squared of 0.068, just in case someone is, listening or watching this and isn't quite well versed in exactly what that means. What is R squared? Why does it matter?
Yeah. So from a simple explanation, it's going to show you how closely one set of data matches with another set of data. And with the total number, think of it as a percentage out of 100% of how well those two sets of numbers correlate to each other. And with that, we can create predictive models that have actual meaningful correlations.
Right. And so in this case, I mean, 0.068 is not super predictive. I mean, if an R squared of 1 would be for every single time miles per hour increase, you scored more fantasy points, right? That's what a R squared of 1 would be. So this is 0.068, not great. But as part of a puzzle, because your model is not only MPH, although that's what we're talking about today, as part of a puzzle, it can be helpful. Can you tell us right now your model with all the components together gives you an R squared of what?
0.165.
0.165, and that is how much better than just going by 24/7 rankings alone?
Almost double, because 24/7 is 0.094.
So the interpretation of that is just if you only drafted players, so to speak, in your C2C drafts based on 24/7's rankings, you'd have I think it translates to like what, you'd have 8% correlation with increased fantasy points or something as you go down or as you go up in the rankings, something kind of like that. And so you're basically double the correlation, even though it's only 0.168. That's not incredible in and of itself, but the model is outperforming just going by 24/7 rankings by twice as accurate or twice as closely correlated with future fantasy points. So it's certainly an improvement. You're beating 24/7 right now. That's great. But we've only scratched the surface. Like you said, you're only including, MPH at the moment and high school production right now. Are you happy with that right now? I mean, it sounds pretty good. Twice as accurate, twice as correlated as 24/7.
Yeah, I'm happy with it just because of the fact that it's just there's no correlations really with anything in high school from an analytical standpoint. It's just so much more difficult to predict than college to the NFL, for example.
Which is a great segue, because I was going to ask you, when you were doing your models for that college to the pro, you had a much better kind of correlation. You had gotten your model to be about what?
Yeah, so around 0.45 to 0.5. Most scores themselves are a 0.3, but that doesn't incorporate as much as a full model. But
yeah, and that's great, right? So, you were basically getting very close to, no one's going to get 1. NFL teams can't get to 1, obviously. But, I think 0.5 is pretty strong. If you compare it to other people out there, either in the Twitter world or whatever, that's pretty competitive. That's a really nice correlation there, but with all your inputs. But just to give everyone an idea of how hard this is, what we're trying to do, a third of that or so is a good one so far for predicting high school into college. So it's really hard. Like you were saying, if we ever try to extrapolate it all the way from high school to NFL, the R squareds are probably gonna be really depressing. I think you were telling me that. So, but we're doing our best. And if we can beat the recruiting services, I think we're doing a pretty good job. And that probably gives us a leg up and our viewers a leg up in their fantasy C2C or college football drafts, because most players, I would say, are going with 24/7. That's what I would have done before I started this whole gig. So, all right, let's play a little red light, green light. Based on your recent research into miles per hour, and I threw one in there that kind of was based on their high school production. They kind of either got a red light or a green light to you as part of the puzzle. Like, we're not throwing these guys out on the street because of one metric, but certainly give someone pause if they don't score what you think they might have based on their tape, and if you actually, these numbers can help guide us. So number 1 is Caleb Burton, red light, green light for you.
Red.
That's right. Caleb Burton is a red light because his max MPH only came out to, I think it was 18.4, 18.5, something like that.
I believe it was 18.5.
And, this is a guy who was ranked very high because of his, basically after his sophomore year of high school. And that tape looks exquisite, but he had a really nasty injury. He really doesn't look quite the same in his senior year. And I don't know, did you measure that 18.4 in his senior tape?
I can't recall. I would assume it's a senior tape.
Honestly, either way, if it was a senior tape,
ones.
yeah, if it was a senior tape, it means he kind of took a step back. And if it was a sophomore tape, then it's even worse because that's when he actually looked awesome. He's got really good agility and start-stop, but you know, the history just says if you can't hit that max speed, that's kind of a threshold you need. So next guy is Kobe Prentice. Did he get a little red light or a green light boost?
Green light for production.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was incredible his senior year. 58, 1086, and 18 touchdowns. Also, you love to see the versatility, 7 rushes for 55 yards and a score on the ground. So he's headed to Alabama. I'm very excited about him. I know you're kind of high on him too. He's fairly down in a lot of the rankings, but got a boost because of the obscene production. And is fast enough, although it wasn't like knock your socks off fast.
Yeah. Second highest production score for the class, by the way.
Yeah, that's great. He's really special. He's kind of small, but I think he can be very good. And then finally, Jordan Hudson. I know he is I would say kind of a cult hero in some circles on Twitter. Like there's some people that absolutely love this guy.
Yeah.
Like some people have him as their wide receiver 1. Red light or green light for you?
Yeah, red light again. Slow.
Yeah, didn't hit that all important 19 miles per hour. I think he's going to SMU. Is that right? Or
TCU.
Did he wind up at TCU? Okay,
yeah.
He was committed to SMU. That's an error on my part. Did not run that through the editors. So he's going to Texas Christian. He should be on a very exciting offense with Sonny Dykes there, but temper those expectations, folks. I mean, I think On3 has him as their number 1 wide receiver. Is that right? Or like top
David,
10,
you
top
might
5?
know better.
I think they have him 5th overall, or 5th wide receiver. I'm pretty sure.
And I'll be honest, I didn't see it just even on the tape. Like I just didn't see a special athlete, and you know it showed in our miles per hour studies. So, thank you, Matt. That's great. We kind of split up the pod. I don't know if we'll always do like take turns situation, but you guys had just been working on some specific stuff, and I wanted to give you time to explain it all. So, David, your time to shine here. You and I had been throwing some. We had been throwing some ideas back and forth about like QB arm velocity. You know, we had talked about this when you first joined. I think we were kind of just throwing some stuff around, and you started measuring it and decided to create a database and do some research. And so what are you looking for with this? What does it mean to you when you're clocking a guy at their arm velo for a quarterback?
Yeah, so far the database is in its infancy. We have a lot of the 2022 recruiting class. Matt got most of that so far. The idea is basically we're going to try to compare current NFL players and how they were in high school to current high school players and try to project forward. We have ball velocity data for the NFL Combine all the way back to 2008. And if you look at it, it looks like 54 miles per hour ball velocity is a pretty good threshold. There's only like a couple outliers. It's Deshaun Watson was at 49. And then if you want to count Tyrod Taylor, he did have like 3 productive seasons as a starter, and that's pretty good for a 6th-round pick. So he was at 50 miles per hour. But aside from those 2 guys, like there's like nobody. It's just a bunch of bums. So it's 54 miles per hour is what we're looking for come draft time. I think like anecdotally, I would say like the most, like the biggest increase you can probably get throughout college is probably like 5 miles per hour. Like on average, it's probably like 3 or 4. So that's kind of where we're on. As for a high school senior, you want to see probably 50 to 51 miles per hour somewhere in there, and you kind of want to get to that 54 mark. That's kind of what I'm seeing so far. I can't prove it yet, but you know that's the gist of it. That's what I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, ball velocity is not solved just yet.
Nah, not yet.
So, but yeah, no, we're collecting data, and like you said, we're trying to get we're looking at actually high school tapes and getting MPH, and then comparing them to what these guys went to. So we have like Herbert's high school, and then we have Herbert at the NFL Combine to kind of see. So we're going to try to create some more numbers there to say, expected increase, like you said, it's roughly 4 or 5. But we don't really know yet. We're still trying to figure that out. So, I want this show to be a little bit of behind the scenes for what we're doing, kind of what we're thinking about. And yes, of course, we're going to have some stuff where it's like, hey, we came to this conclusion and this is actionable information. But some of it's just going to be, hey, this is work in progress, what we're looking at, and this is what we know right now. But I have some stuff here about ball velocity. So Dane Brugler, NFL scout, has said, whoops, it went too fast. But he said you need to be at least 55. Below 50 is a red flag for NFL prospects. And then I got some quotes out of an article on the Draft Network, and these are going too fast to really talk about it. But what they say is that ball velocity is not all equal, right? I mean, anticipation plays a role. Like maybe Deshaun Watson has perfect anticipation, and so even though he doesn't get the ball out so fast, he knows his arm, he knows where he needs to throw it, all these things. There's a lot of facets to that part. And then there's all sorts of technique and different things that are coming into play with ending up getting the ball where it needs to be. The last part of this, though, I'm going to play it one more time, is a quote that basically says, if you have a really strong arm, a quarterback can not abandon plays that a quarterback with a weaker arm may be forced to surrender. And that's that last quote right there. That's the true value of arm strength. Patrick Mahomes is never out of a play. Justin Herbert, never out of a play, because they can ram that thing in there 25 yards across the field to a pinpoint spot. Whereas some other guys may have to either take a sack, throw it away, check down, whatever. So I think it's, we're talking about speed here. This time we're talking about ball velocity, the speed of the ball. But I think it's a similar idea where it's a threshold thing. You need a minimum requirement. And then on top of the minimum requirement, yes, faster, more velocity allows you to do some things that someone with less velocity may not be able to do. But it doesn't mean you're not going to be good. So is that kind of how you're taking it, David?
Yeah, it's pretty much how I see it. It's not exactly a requirement. It definitely helps for sure, I think. Especially if you want to stress the defense, you got to be able to make those, those outs and those sideline passes. And, I think it's important in general. I just think that if we can get to that 50, for a high school senior, if that 50 mark is probably a good spot.
Yeah, I know that in baseball, when scouts are looking at high school kids, sometimes especially some of the foreign prospects, like they're looking at them when they're 13. And the rule of thumb is, at least for baseball, is you can gain about a mile per hour velo every year in your teenage years, and then about a half a mile per hour through age about 22, 23. And then after that, you might be maxed out unless you have some mechanics change that really, allows you to throw the ball harder. And so I think that lines up with what you're saying. We're looking at guys they're probably 18 years old. I don't think they're going to get, if football is just harder to throw. And so I don't think you're going to get the full +1 mile per hour per year. But if you work on it and all this, I think, yeah, you're right. By the time 5 years later, maybe you add 5, but probably that's like the generous number. Maybe it's more like 3-ish. So I agree with you. If we're looking at guys in their senior tape, I agree 50, at least to then project, hey, by the time they're in the NFL or at the combine, they'll be flirting with 53, 54, 55, and not at least take their names out of the running to be a top pick if they're good enough to make the combine, at least, So I think that's a good number to look at. I like the 50 as kind of a rule of thumb. Of course, We know, we've talked about this, David, if you are a quarterback who's super mobile and you can win with your legs, that does change the dynamic. And maybe you don't have to have the howitzer on top of your shoulder to make plays and be effective. So, I want to play a little red light, green light as well with you. 3 quarterbacks we've looked at, and I know we're always chatting about this, but 2 that surprised us, 1 that disappointed us. Want to start with a guy who's really low ranked. He's actually, I think, listed as an athlete, and that's Thomas Castellanos, who's going to UCF. He's a smallish guy, but I didn't say red light, green light.
He's green.
Yeah, green light. I mean, max velo over 50, and he's like, looks like Kyler Murray out there. Very small, even on his tape, you can tell.
Yeah, I think On3 has him at like 5'10", 194. I think 247 has him in that 190 range. But yeah, he's like a shorter guy. He's super mobile, and apparently he has a pretty strong arm for his size. So I would say green on him for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like we talked about with Matt, it doesn't mean like we're guaranteeing Castellanos is going to be awesome, but at least he's got some prerequisite arm strength that you wouldn't maybe not assume it based on his size. But like I will say, you said he's pretty mobile. I mean, I looked at his tape again the other day. He's probably the most twitched up quarterback in this class in terms of short area quickness, juking ability, and that kind of thing. In that Kyler, it's too easy of a comp because Kyler's small too, but like in that he runs like a Kyler. Whereas a lot of these other faster quarterbacks in this class, Nate Johnson, that people like, and there's a couple other ones, they're long striders. I mean, you can tell they're track guys. But Castellanos is like exciting. I mean, he is electric. And if he's got the bare minimum arm, I'm actually going to be targeting him. Playing in the G5, I mean, if nothing else, I think he could be a pretty interesting college football player.
Yeah, and I think he has to be in the top tier production-wise. Is scrambling. I'm pretty sure he had over 3,000 rushing yards, and I think he had 69 rushing touchdowns. I have to double check that. But
oh my gosh,
a lot of rushing touchdowns too. So
yeah, I mean, you watch the tape on him, and he does kind of pop off the screen immediately. You're like, oh my God, this guy is electric. I mean, absolutely electric. Shout out to, I wish I had the name off the top of my head, but actually someone in our Discord at Campus to Canton brought his name up months ago. And I hadn't really even, because he was listed as an athlete, so I hadn't really looked at him or anything, but, and you'd expect him to have a bit of a noodle arm, but he doesn't. And then, David, we were talking like he's kind of like, I mean, maybe Derek King-ish, perhaps.
Yeah, he's somewhere along those lines. Maybe not quite as efficient as a passer as he was, but yeah, I would say somewhere along those lines, sure.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can get a guy like that, I mean, we're talking like end of a draft in a C2C league or something like that. Just always keeping in mind the fantasy implications, and you get Derek King out of that draft pick. You're doing awesome, at least on the college side. All right, red light, green light. A guy I have been forced to change my my opinion on. It's Tavin Jackson.
I mean, I guess we got to go red light, right?
I think it's a red light. I mean, he's not really even close to 50. He's going to have to improve to even get to barely 50. He's an athletic dude. But yeah, he didn't make the cut. Additionally, kind of a low volume passer in high school. That's not awesome for me. And so one thing though you've mentioned is, and we can't know this, but like kind of growing into a body. If anybody has a chance to kind of like physically mature, Jackson might be a guy like that.
Yeah, he's got a big frame. I think he's 6'4", 190. His brother plays basketball on the Indiana basketball team. So like, and he's huge. I think he's like 6'8", 260 or something like that. So I'd say he's got good genetics. He probably will fill out, and that's something I'm going to look at with this database, kind of keeping track of weight and like how much weight gain could help with ball velocity increase. So I don't know though. It's a big ask, I think, for him to get to 54. I do like his game in general, and like I do like the landing spot going to Tennessee. But yeah, that's just, he has a noodle arm pretty much. So I just don't really want to bet on him, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I had to bump him down. I really liked him too. Just like you said, the athleticism, basketball background. His brother plays at obviously a very high level. Like he's like stars on the Indiana basketball team. Like he's not even like a player. He's like their best player. So super athletic, family. But yeah, I mean, geez. And then, I was always a little wary. And this is another thing I want to look at eventually is like, does it matter when these guys come out of high school and they're throwing 150 passes a season? And we're projecting things because we see tools at camps, but like their high school coach wouldn't let him throw the ball. Like, I know coaches can be set in their ways and, hey, this is my offense, but it's a little concerning. I mean, Tavin Jackson, of all the top tier quarterbacks, like by far had the least volume passing. We were talking 12, 15 attempts a game. Like I watched a whole game of Cedar something, I don't know, Center Grove, I think this is high school. And I mean, it was like unwatchable. There's just a bunch of dives up the middle. Like it stunk. And finally, a guy we both like, but did he get a red light or a green light when you looked at his MPH? That's Connor Harrell headed to UNC.
Green light.
That's a green light, folks. And what do we like about it? I know you and me both kind of bonded over liking Connor Harrell. What do you like about it?
Yeah, so this is kind of like the cherry on the top for me. I already liked his game. He was pretty much checking all sorts of boxes as far as like efficiency goes in high school, quick release, quick feet. He's pretty twitched up, good scrambler. He's super accurate. He completed over 70% of his passes, and he was playing against good competition. He was playing, I think, 6A, 7A in Alabama. It's the toughest league there is there. He's a two-time state champion. There's not much to, I mean, the services don't seem to like him as much as we do, but I don't know. This is the cherry on the top for me. He hits 50 miles per hour. He's like right on the threshold. So I'm a fan.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically exactly how I looked at it. And frankly, I think in a lot of ways, what we've talked about tonight, both with the wide receivers and these quarterbacks, it's kind of that last, either cherry on top or, I don't know, turd on top, where it just kind of confirms what you already thought in some cases. And then other guys, it's like, well, maybe it's just deceptive on tape. And I need to take that into account. But like, yeah, a lot of these we're not saying this is the only reason we bump these guys up. But like you said, I mean, Connor Harrell, to me, I was like crossing my fingers. I remember the day I was like, hey, check out Connor Harrell, give me his MPH. And I was like, please don't be low. Please don't be low. Like at Tavin Jackson. I mean, it's like, I liked him, but this is a problem. I mean, this is a real problem when he's at 47.5. So it kind of just confirmed what we liked. But yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Like, what else could you possibly want Connor Harrell to do? It doesn't kind of really make sense that he's a 3-star. I mean, he's not even a 4-star. He's a 3-star. He's way down the list. Another thing I think worth doing that we'll do, I know, Matt, you've talked about running back Newtons, which is basically a calculation of weight and speed. Basically Newtons of force these guys are generating. And you did look at that for receivers, but didn't tell us much. And we kind of think running backs, it may matter more, right?
Yeah, so it's about a third to a half as predictive as just pure miles per hour time for wide receivers.
Which was surprising that weight didn't seem to matter for wide receivers, but I have a feeling it's I know you haven't run the numbers yet, but that's something we're going to be doing, just giving you guys a sneak peek in what we could be talking about in the future. Newtons of force generated by running backs. Does that matter at the high school level, translating to college and then eventually the pros? I know, David, you and I have talked about, like, do we need to come up with something that kind of like accounts for high school competition, some kind of multiplier or some kind of demerit or something, like if you're at tiny private schools in North Georgia, like Gunner Stockton was, playing schools with like 50 kids in the class or something like that. So these are things we're going to be looking at. We just ask questions all the time in our little Slack, and then we figure out ways to answer those questions, and we want to bring it here to you guys and gals listening to help us all get better. And this is an area in the recruiting world, like, these feel impossible. These questions feel impossible. I remember when I was talking to David about like, can we like figure out miles per hour of the football? And we kind of figured like, we were like, well, we can do it with miles per hour on the ground of these guys, you know, but it's easier to tell what yardage they're starting at. But we figured out a way we feel comfortable that we're at least kind of getting this MPH of velocity. But we ask these questions all the time, and we're trying to answer them. And I think that's going to make for really good content, some really interesting discussions, and hopefully some actionable advice. But just keep listening to us. We're going to do this once a week. More players, more metrics, and more studies are going to be coming out of big wide receiver guy, Matt, and Solving Football, David. Guys, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I look forward to more.
See ya.
Thanks.
All right. Good night, everybody.